Understanding the internal logic of the Igbo and things fall apart. The white man was good and reasonable and intelligent and courageous. The savages arrayed against him were sinister and stupid. I hated their guts. These are the words of Chinua Achebe, author of Things Fall Apart, describing the characters he encountered in the books of his youth. Achebe soon came to realize that the reason he held such negative views of African characters was because of the racial bias of the European writers. So the words at the top are actually from the author of Things Fall Apart, who, if we scroll down and look, is a man of color. So why would a man of color say something like the white man was good and reasonable and intelligent and courageous? The savages, whom they were referring to as the Africans, arrayed against him were sinister and stupid. I hated their guts. So if you look down here where it says the negative views of African characters was because of the racial bias of European writers that he encountered in his youth. So that means that he was reading things as a child or as a young man that had a lot of racial bias in them. When you think about what the word bias means, that kind of means that you are more prone to believing something or liking something or feeling something toward one side or the other based on your own thoughts and beliefs. So in this case, the Europeans were biased against the Africans because of the things that they thought they knew about them and their culture. Things Fall Apart worked to correct these images of African savagery. So Chinua Achebe was trying to get rid of these negative images that some people had about Africans and African culture. Things Fall Apart tells the story of Okonkwo, a member of the Igbo tribe of Nigeria, who rises up from modest beginnings to become a prosperous farmer and tribal leader. The novel has three parts. Part one portrays Okonkwo's character, so the way he was as a person, his family, and the traditions of his village of Umu Ofia. Part two shows Okonkwo's exile in his mother's homeland of Mbata after he commits an accidental crime. And part three follows Okonkwo's return to Umuofia, where he finds the European religion and government have changed all that he once knew. As Okonkwo's friend, Obarika says, the white man has put a knife on the things that held us together and we have fallen apart. Okonkwo himself falls apart as a result of the European intrusion, and the novel ends tragically with his suicide. So during this time, when imperialism was happening, so all of these Europeans were coming over to, in this case specifically, Africa, and they were trying to impress their own cultural beliefs and values onto the Africans by forcing their religion on them, by forcing their the way that they dressed on them, their Western ideals and beliefs on them. Okonkwo hadn't encountered these things as they were happening because he was exiled. He had been sent away. When he returned, and he found all of these changes that happened to his village and to the people that he once knew, it was overwhelming and it was too much for him. And the book, as it said, ends with him committing suicide. In one of his essays, Achebe refers to a letter he received from high school students in Yonkers, New York, after they had read Things Fall Apart. One of them was particularly happy to learn about the customs and superstitions of an African tribe. The young fellow is obviously unaware that the life of his own tribesmen in Yonkers, New York, is full of odd customs and superstitions. So, what Achebe is saying here is Africans are not the only ones with customs and superstitions. We all have customs, we all have traditions and beliefs within our culture, within our families. And he was saying this young man must be unaware that that's the case, that he himself comes from a tribe, from a family, from a group of people that also have odd customs and superstitions. Now, you may think, what's so odd about a custom or a superstition or tradition from someone who is from Yonkers, New York? Well, to someone possibly from an African culture, some of the things that we do may seem odd or strange or superstitious. Yesterday, we watched a video, and before you watch this video, you should have looked at a video that gave you about a 3-minute insight into things fall apart and how it's related to imperialism. They mentioned in the video that there are many cultures that would think it is odd or strange that in American culture, when our elderly can no longer care for themselves, we often place them in retirement homes. In a lot of other cultures, the elderly are revered. They are very highly thought of, and they would not ever put their elderly in a nursing home. They care for them until they pass away. They take them into their own homes and care for them. So that could be an example of a custom or something that happens in our country that people from another country may think is strange. There is a lesson to be learned from Achebe's response. The idea is not to learn about the customs of the Igbo from a comfortable distance, but rather to climb inside this culture and feel its internal logic. So, the reasoning that exists behind Igbo traditions and beliefs. Why do they do the things that they do? Actually, trying to take a closer look at the reasons behind why a certain group of people have the customs and traditions and superstitions that they have. You look at it from a distance, you're not really trying to understand the reasoning behind it. You're making judgments. And that's what Achebe was saying. You need to actually use your internal logic, your reasoning to find out why these traditions and beliefs exist. What is their purpose? An early scene from the novel offers the reader practice in identifying internal logic when Okonkwo drinks palm wine from his first human head. Some readers might react strongly to the practice of drinking from a human head, but what is the internal logic here? If then statements are helpful in understanding the internal logic of a culture. So if we look at what they're saying here, if then statements are helpful in understanding internal logic, how can using an if then statement help me understand or use my reasoning skills to try to figure out why a certain culture has the traditions and beliefs that they have? If we use Western internal logic, so when we say Western, primarily we're referring to European and American. So Western internal logic, that of people from Europe or people from America, we may say, if drinking from a human head is a symbol of barbarism, then nobody should ever do it. So we may look at it as something barbaric, something savage, something that you shouldn't do. Why would you drink wine or drink anything out of a human head? That is Western internal logic, Western reasoning. However, if you use Igbo internal logic, someone from the Igbo tribe in Africa, you may say, if a human head is a symbol of manhood, then Okonkwo should celebrate his bravery at important village gatherings by drinking from one. So in that culture, it's acceptable. It's a symbol of manhood. If someone displays bravery, if someone displays an act of manhood, then that is what they would do to celebrate. So rather than this becoming an act of unthinking savagery, something savage, something that no one should do, it becomes entirely logical. At the end of Things Fall Apart, the white district commissioner discusses the book he plans to write called The Pacification of the Primitive Tribes of the Lower Niger. So let's take a quick look at this title, The Pacification of the Primitive Tribes of the Lower Niger. So think about the word pacification, to subdue, to make quiet or less violent. Who do we think that they are trying to pacify, to subdue, to make more quiet? Obviously, we're speaking of these primitive tribes. So by calling them primitive, we have to think, is this a positive or a negative term? So primitive meaning not advanced, uncivilized. So referring to these tribes as uncivilized savages that need to be subdued, need to be quieted down, made to be less violent. The commissioner plans to dedicate a reasonable paragraph, and you see it's in quotation marks because what he is saying is reasonable is more than likely not reasonable, to Okonkwo's story. So he wanted to dedicate a section of this book to Okonkwo's story. and it is clear that the internal logic of the Igbo will have no place in his book. So he is clearly not planning to look at the internal logic to use his reasoning to understand the traditions and the customs of the Igbo people. He is only trying to look at them in the light that he wants to look at them in with his bias, calling them savages, calling them primitive, saying they needed to be pacified. And that is the issue that we're seeing with the book that the commissioner has written. So the questions you'll need to answer for this assignment: who is the author of Things Fall Apart? In his youth, how did Achebe feel about the African characters he encountered in literature and why? So why did he feel the way he felt about the African characters in the books that he read as a young man? What was the purpose Achebe had for writing Things Fall Apart? Who is the main character of Things Fall Apart? Of which tribe is he a member? What is the name of his home village? And be careful with this one. We want the name of his home village, not his mother's home village or where he was exiled, but his home village. Number 7, what point is Achebe making when he mentions the tribe of the high school student from Yonkers? What was he trying to say to this high school student about him being a part of a tribe and him being so excited to learn about these superstitions and customs of an African tribe? And then give me an example of a custom or superstition in your family or from your culture. Number 8, what is the title of the book that the White District Commissioner plans to write at the end of Things Fall Apart? How would you describe the tone of this title? So the tone meaning the feeling that you get from that title. What feeling does it evoke? Is it a feeling of joy, superstition? Is it a negative tone? Is it a positive tone? What is the tone of the title of the book that the district commissioner is planning to write? Number 9, who is Obirika? And number 10, you will define the terms below: bias, customs, culture, internal logic, and Western.